Legal rights for Black women who work for the federal government. This is for Black women who currently work for the federal government or if you've been recently laid off from the federal government. We're going to have a conversation today about your legal rights. I wanted to have this conversation because we know what's been going on in the United States. There's a lot of confusion and chaos and so many other things going on right now. And so I wanted to bring on an attorney to talk about your legal rights. So if you're a Black woman, again, who currently work for the federal government or you've been recently laid off, please watch this conversation because I think it will be very helpful for you to be informed about your legal rights. If you don't know me already, I'm Dr. Kamani. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I've been licensed over 20 years. I'm also a toxic job survivor. But more importantly, I'm a toxic job liberator for Black women. I'm also the co-founder and co-host of the Job Liberation Virtual Summit for Black Women, which just passed. If you want to get a replay of that, the information is in the description section. So I'm excited to welcome back my Spelman sister, Whitney. So Whitney, can you please introduce yourself and get right to the conversation?
Hi, yes, my name is Whitney Railey. I am a labor and employment attorney. I specialize in representing federal employees with my partner, Andrew Weeks, at our firm, Legal Justice at Work. We also represent some private employees in labor and employment matters, as well as unions. So that's all we do is labor and employment law.
Okay, thank you so much for being here, Whitney. So Whitney's been here before, but again, I just felt like this conversation was timely for all of us in this community. Even if you don't work for the federal government or you weren't recently laid off, it's good for us to all know this information because there might be Black women that we know in our circles that we could support them. So Whitney, let's start off with what are some of the unique challenges that Black women encounter working for the federal government? Let's start there.
I'm sure, absolutely. So I believe the federal government is one of the largest employers of Black people and Black women, certainly in jobs that are higher paying jobs. And we're starting to see the effects of this. I saw an article recently that Black women accounted for the largest job loss in a 1 month or so period due to the recent cuts in federal employment. So I think that what is unique about, and I'm a prior federal employee. I think what is unique about being a Black woman in those spaces is that, in some ways, the options for advancing are greater than in the private sector, just because there are so many statutory and regulatory restrictions and requirements that apply to everything down from conducting and finalizing a performance evaluation, as well as issues related to discipline, as well as opportunities for lateral transfers and advancement, not just in a regular, so to speak, federal job, but also going into the senior executive service, which is almost like getting a C-suite position. There's just a lot more options. But I think what comes with that access is you start to see where the higher up you get, the fewer people of color, particularly Black women that you see. And that's an issue of disparity that's sort of built into the system in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Got it. Okay. So many Black people go into the federal government because there's certain laws in place to protect us,
Mhm.
right? Okay. And so can you talk to us about Title VII? I'm reading my notes because I'm not familiar with the legal terms, right? Can you tell us about Title VII of the Civil Rights Act and the No Fear Act, how they specifically relate to Black women and protect Black women in the workplace?
Sure, absolutely. So Title VII is a robust civil rights law that is supposed to um, prohibit discrimination on the basis of certain specific protected characteristics, such as race,
Mm-hmm.
as well as gender or sex. And also, it prohibits retaliation for participating in a protected activity, such as filing an EEO complaint
Mm-hmm.
or doing something like opposing discrimination in the workplace, right? So you send an email and say, hey, I think that what you're doing constitutes illegal harassment because of my race or gender or color or some other protected characteristic under Title VII. Or any of the other statutes like the Age Discrimination and Employment Act. So that's sort of the statutory framework. The No Fear Act is a federal law that is supposed to assist with the eradication of discrimination in the federal workforce. It comes with it some certain reporting requirements and different things that are supposed to be done. Although I think that its enforcement can vary depending on who the administration is. So, for example, with the current administration, you're starting to see the rolling back of EEOC enforcement. You're starting to see the rolling back of compliance with those federal EEO program requirements, like the No Fear Act reporting, like having access to EEO counselors, which is a critical step for federal employees to file EEO complaints, because you have to initiate contact with an EEO counselor within a certain period of time, or you can't file your claim. And some of them have been swept up in the DEIA cuts as well as the RIFs.
Okay. So for Black women who have been laid off currently, right? So these layoffs happen. What legal recourse do they have at this point?
Sure. So that's a very interesting question that I hate to respond with. It depends, but it really depends on a myriad of factors. Pretty much every day that we're waking up, and my partner and I are staying on top of this, there is a case in federal court that's being filed in some jurisdiction, whether that be in DC or all the way in the Ninth Circuit, which is over in California, that will have an effect on the so layoffs in the federal sector are called reductions in force, or RIFs, which has its own complicated statutory, not only framework, but regulations. RIFs are so complicated that on average, it takes 8 months to RIF an employee, just because of all of the procedures you have to follow. What we're seeing now is these wide-scale RIFs being done in a matter of months. So obviously there's mistakes. Lots of mistakes. And so that's what's being battled out in the courts right now, as well as with the Merit Systems Protection Board. So there's a case out in the Ninth Circuit that the judge just issued a stay on the RIFs. The federal government has appealed that decision, but we have employees now who are getting emails saying, okay, you were supposed to be RIFed next month. Now we're holding that in abeyance pending the outcome of litigation. And so that just came out today. So it's just I know people have received notices that they're being RIFed. Many of them are on paid administrative leave. It's just sort of in a holding pattern, and we're supposed to be terminated as of next month. And now this court case has come down, and it looks like things are going to be stayed. But of course, that's going to be appealed, or it has been appealed. So we're just waiting to see what happens with that, as well as if the Supreme Court takes it up. So unfortunately, it appears that federal employees are effectively like pawns as of right now in this sort of political gamesmanship with respect to alleged intentions to save money, which don't quite make sense. So most, what most people don't realize is that most of these people you see and these numbers in the reporting are actually on paid administrative leave, doing nothing when they could be working. So I'm not sure how that's saving money. So for example, all the people that they got rid of who were DEIA employees or designated as such, many of them are still on paid administrative leave while the agency effectively determines what to do with them. Or they were intending to RIF them, and now this case has happened and they're in a holding pattern. So it's a lot of money being wasted, but also a lot of uncertainty for federal employees. I've heard reporting from client who told me that he's felt suicidal because he doesn't know if when he goes to bed at night, he wakes up in the morning, if he'll have a job or not. That's just a lot of anxiety to put on people.
Yeah, so it's like this emotional roller coaster. So legally, there's already been filed suit about the risk. You said it should normally take 8 months, but now we're not saying it's 8 months. So a lot of people are on paid administrative leave while they're waiting for things to kind of play out in the legal system.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Andrew and I were we were set to file an appeal with the Merit Systems Protection Board with most a class action for most employees with the CDC. So that would be hundreds of employees who were being riffed. But now this order has come down and it appears that things are being stayed. But that raises some other legal questions about people being put on administrative leave, right? So there's the Administrative Leave Act, which says that putting someone on administrative leave in excess of 10 days can be a prohibited personnel practice, which means that you can battle that out with the MSPB and say, look, I shouldn't be on administrative leave. I should, at a minimum, be able to do my job and continue, because the federal government is all about experience, right? Yeah, everybody says, well, you're on paid administrative leave. You don't have to do anything. You're on vacation. Well, as a federal employee, if you're not practicing your craft and building your skills and you're losing out on actual sort of tangible deliverables during that performance rating period, that can end up being a stain in your personnel record, right? Let's say someone always got exceptional or outstanding overall performance ratings, and now you've been on admin leave for 8 months, not doing your job. Well, you're not going to be able to get a positive performance evaluation, which then is going to raise questions. Um, and on top of the fact that the work is just not being done, and things, I've heard of research that has taken years is being lost, and you can't get it back because people are being put on admin leave while people sort of figure out, I guess, what they're going to do. Whereas it should have been figured out before. You measure twice and cut once, and that's just not what is happening. It's really the most inefficient thing I've ever seen. And just for context, like with RIFs, the last time RIFs happened was any kind of substantive scale, significant scale, was during the Clinton administration. So this is not something that happens often at all. So, I was probably like 7, certainly was not practicing law. It's very wild to see the precedent that we're having to cite in our cases being stuff from the 90s. That's like the most recent precedent. On top of that means that the people who are doing these RIFs, they too likely don't have the experience in doing them. So they're just clacking buttons to try to get this done as quickly as possible. Because how do you send out notices for hundreds of thousands of people, and huge mistakes are being made?
Yeah. So Whitney, is there any legal recourse? It sounds like asinine that somebody could get dinged for not doing their job when they've been on administrative leave. Right. So if they come back, if they're called back in, and then there's no legal recourse for that. Like, wait a minute, how can you evaluate me when I've been forced on this leave?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question, and that's something that we're exploring now that at least for the time being, and things could change as quickly as tomorrow.
Mm,
The RIFs are being stayed. Is okay. Well, this retaliation for being perceived to have complained by way of this lawsuit being filed, that
mm,
the RIF action was done illegally. Well, if you're a federal employee and you actually complain about something being illegal, or you're perceived to have done so, that's illegal to do something to you because of that. And so there's a real question mark here as to whether or not this sort of indefinite admin leave is more so retaliation,
mm.
rather than we just need to do this because of the court case.
Right.
And those arguments could be raised with the Merit Systems Protection Board.
Okay.
Case after case says that the statutes outlining the appeal procedures for federal employees are comprehensive statutes, which just means that you can't run and go to federal court. A lot of people think, I'm a federal employee, something bad has happened to me, I can run to federal court, and that's just not the case. If you look closely at the cases that are being filed in federal court, it is, cities, attorney generals for different states and things filing suit, unions who are filing suit. And there's going to be a question as to whether or not they have standing and to bring these claims, or whether or not they more appropriately should have been brought with like the Merit Systems Protection Board, or EEOC. So that
What is the Merit System Protection Board? What is that?
Sure. The Merit Systems Protection Board is a federal agency that has exclusive jurisdiction over certain types of adverse actions involving certain types of federal employees. It's a bit of a Byzantine scheme, statutory scheme, and regulatory scheme. Most federal employees are what you call Title V employees, so they're appointed under Title V of the U.S. Code. But there are also other personnel systems like, Department of Veterans Affairs. Those employees are Title 38 employees. You can also have a hybrid Title 38, Title V employee. So it can get really confusing in that way too, because depending on what statute your position is falls under, you may or may not have rights to go to MSPB. It may be something that you actually have to go through the union. And so you have to figure all these things out. Meanwhile, there's a time limit to appeal actions. There's a time limit to grieve things and with the union and things like that. So it can get very complicated, particularly when you have things being done that are unprecedented and people are still just trying to figure out even what's going on,
Okay, that was my next question. So is the union filing these suits?
Yes, for most of them, it's the union. Like if you notice, it's not individual employees.
Okay.
Unions, and some judges have found the unions don't have standing to bring these suits, and that it should be filed with the Federal Labor Relations Authority, or MSPB. So, I know that people see the headlines and it'll be like, oh, Judge Jones overturns or smacks down Trump's executive order on XYZ. But then when you really get into the cases and pull the docket documents, it gets a little more complicated than that. So our position is, because we get asked a lot, what do I do? I'm seeing stuff in the courts. Do I not need to do anything? Our position is that if you are under a deadline to file an appeal or to file an EEOC claim, that you go ahead and do that. Unless, for example, in the situation with the RIFs, where the agency has emailed out and said, we're not going to actually fire you. Because once you're fired, that starts your time clock to file the appeal, right? And so unless you have something in your hand that says that this action is either not going to be affected or it's being reversed, move forward with filing any appeals or complaints, because there are timelines, strict timelines.
Okay, so if there's a Black woman watching this right now, and let's say she received a RIF notice, what would you advise her to do? She works for the federal government. She received a RIF notice. What would you advise for her to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would read the notice from start to finish. Okay. Even if there are sections that appear to just be boilerplate gobbledygook and maybe you graze over it, read it very closely. There's going to be certain things in there that are very important. Pretty much everything in there is going to be important. It's going to outline the factors and information that they considered in determining that you were should be RIFed. It's going to talk about your effective date of termination. It's going to talk about your appeal rights. And so you want to make sure that you review all of that and understand when the effective date is of your removal, because that's going to start the time clock. Now, as far as EEOC stuff, that's 45 days. You've got to engage a counselor. So, and You're supposed to be able to contact an EEO counselor, and they should explain to you sort of what the process is. So if
Mhm.
you think that something's being done, for example, we've heard stories, departments that have been riffed, or at least gotten riff notices, and it was all the black people that got the notices.
Mm.
White employees got moved up and out and different things like that. So,
Mm.
that may be something that falls within the realm, or likely is something that falls within the realm of EEOC.
Mhm.
Got to consider, should I go ahead and file that claim as well?
Can you distinguish between, because you talked about appeals, you talked about EEOC. Can you help us distinguish if you get the RIF? Of course, I heard you say read it carefully, right? What distinguishes if it's beneficial for you to file EEOC, who should file an EEOC, and then the appeals process? Like, what do you even do about that?
Sure. I mean, I think that when individuals file with the EEOC and MSPB, they're a bit shocked at how much it's like real court.
Mm,
As it is, right? Once you file something, particularly with MSPB, which can tend to be a pretty quick process. When we file an MSPB appeal, we usually are from the time of filing the appeal to going to hearing is about 6 months.
okay.
So that's very fast, and you're going to be expected to, be able to follow the judge's orders. They're going to ask you to file certain things. They may ask you to file something like a jurisdictional statement. You're going to have to know how to initiate discovery, to even know what to ask for with respect to the RIF. Um, and then you're going to have to be able to talk to the judge with any status conferences, pre-hearing conferences.
And that point, you definitely should have an attorney.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
people try to do those things on their own, but particularly something as complicated as a RIF,
Hmm.
you would definitely need an attorney. If it's something like I got suspended for 2 weeks, that's different.
Okay.
But litigating a RIF, it would be incredibly difficult to do that as a pro se person. And the same goes for EEOC cases.
Mhm.
And
But can I ask you something when you're right quick? Okay, just to distinguish. Okay, so remind me of the acronym again. The M. What is that stand for again?
oh, the U.S. Merit Systems Protection Board.
Merit System Protection Board. Okay, and so what would distinguish if somebody went to the Merit System Protection Board as opposed to EOC? What distinguishes the two?
Sure. So it's a question of what do these two agencies have jurisdiction to decide, and
Okay.
sometimes there's overlap. And so, for example, if someone got riffed
Hmm.
and they think that it was not only were the procedures not followed, but they think that it was motivated by retaliatory animus because they complained about, some EEO stuff. So it falls under Title VII. You could challenge the RIF with MSPB and also raise that Title VII claim with the MSPB. You can't do the reverse and go to EEOC and start trying to challenge the RIF because procedures weren't followed, only because EEOC doesn't have jurisdiction to, hear that appeal. That's MSPB.
Okay.
So that's sort of some of the distinctions, but also those are decisions that we help clients make. Is it more advantageous for certain claims to be brought with MSPB or the EEOC, and sort of what will that look like from various different aspects, from an evidentiary standpoint and just efficiency as well.
Okay. So if a Black woman gets a RIF, the first step should be to find a labor and employment attorney.
Absolutely, absolutely,
Okay.
and just some basic. I don't want to say basic, but some things that people should start doing if they even think they may be ripped. But particularly if you get a notice,
Mm-hmm.
um, download what's called your EOPF. If someone's a federal employee, they know what I'm talking about. It's
What is that?
your electronic personnel file.
Okay.
So you'll want to download your entire personnel file. I know for some folks it's really long if they've been there for 20 years, but download the whole thing because we're seeing people immediately being put on admin leave and losing access to their systems. which
Mm.
means that you can't go in and get things that you need,
Mhm.
even down to if you elected to have your W-2s and things sent to you electronically through the agency's system,
Mhm.
payroll system, for example, uh,
Mhm.
you couldn't access that. So download any important documents, your personnel file, um, screenshot the accounting of your your annual leave and your sick leave balances. Download any documents like W-2s or things like that that are housed in the electronic payroll system, because you're going to lose access. I mean, that's pretty much what we're seeing across the board. Very few people are being allowed to remain in their positions. They're being put on paid admin leave.
So they lose access to all this.
Correct.
Wow. Okay. 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 So the first things you said, when you get the ref, read through it carefully, get
Hmm.
an attorney, a labor and employment attorney, and then download your electronic employment file, screenshot your annual sick leave and vacation time, anything like that, and also screenshot what was in the payroll system, like your W-2s.
Hmm.
Okay, any other steps that Black women could take care of if they get that RIF?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have been seeing is that managers start to reach out via text or personal email because the employees lost their access to the system.
Ah.
So the manager is texting them things. I know it's tempting for people to ask, what's the status of my job? To ask certain questions and different things like that. I would just be very careful in how those communications are occurring, particularly because now it's like manager is contacting you on official agency email or phone to your personal. And we've seen some people get really comfortable because they're getting a text from someone who they thought that was their friend. And it's on their personal phone. So with all of this litigation, I would just be very careful about that. Another thing too that I suspect is going to happen again is that there's going to be another round of the deferred resignation program offer.
Mhm, mhm,
Um, if you read that language in the agreement, it is saying that you agree to forever waive all claims you have or could have had against your agency. So don't take the deferred resignation and think that you're going to be able to file or proceed with a pending EEOC claim, or claim with the MSPB or OSC or FLRA or any one of the other alphabet agencies,
mhm.
because you're waiving those claims. Yes,
Ah,
there are arguments that an attorney can make to say, this language is overly broad and all that thing. And that's fine, but it's really hard to invalidate an agreement once you've signed it.
wow. Well, I want to go back to something. So, managers texting you on your personal phone, why would the managers be doing that?
So we're seeing managers texting people backing up a little bit, as I said, with,
Mhm,
for example, performance evaluations.
mhm, mhm.
There are very strict regulations from OPM that dictate how those are supposed to be done.
Okay.
So you get your performance standards in the beginning of the year. You're
Mhm,
supposed to then have a mid-year review. Then you have your final annual review. And
mhm.
it's pretty much the same across the board with all the agencies.
Okay.
And so managers are contacting people and saying, hey, because the fiscal year runs from September 30th to I think October 1. So we're about in the middle, a little more than in the middle of the fiscal year.
Mhm,
And so it's about mid-year review time. And so
mhm.
people are getting text messages and saying, hey, I need to do your mid-year review.
What?
Can you tell me what you've been doing for the past? And
Whitney, stop. Whitney,
yeah,
stop. Wait, wait,
I'm
wait. They're on
very
administrative leave, and then their manager will text them on their even though they're on administrative leave, talking
correct.
about a mid-year review?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And so naturally that can make someone want to go off. And so, or ask questions that, because I've seen also the opposite where someone's like, well, let me tell them all the stuff I did do while I was there, and hopefully they will have my back and let me get my job back or get a job, and they're going to look out for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't know. I would be just very careful in how I communicate um, with those inquiries.
What do you think would be the best way or options for responding to those types of inquiries?
Sure, absolutely. So I think first of all, and this is my sort of rule across the board with any kind of communications that could be exhibits, you got to move off the cell phones. So I would be asking my manager, I would tell them, hey, thanks for reaching out. I'm going to email you a response to this because I don't use my personal cell phone for this type of communication.
Hmm.
And so then I would email and just sort of copy or reiterate what the ask was in the text message.
Okay.
Um, and then I would flip it on them and say, as you know, I've been on administrative leave involuntarily for the past, however many months, 3 or 4 months,
Mm-hmm.
which is the majority of the mid-year review period. Can you
Mm-hmm.
please provide guidance on how I'm supposed to respond to this since I've
Mm-hmm.
been on involuntary admin leave? And I would just put it back on them. That
Okay.
way you have some sort of guidance on how to respond, but also
Mm-hmm.
now you're creating a record that your subsequent response is based on the fact that you've been on involuntary admin leave.
Right, right, right. So that's good advice. So can you tell the audience why is it a good idea to take this conversation off of the cell phone and why it's important to have an email?
Yeah, I think that for a lot of reasons. One, you got to put up boundaries. When people feel like they can just text you, and then
Mm-hmm.
particularly text you with things that are urgent, like send me a list of all the things you've been doing, during the review period by the COB today. Things like that. You got to put up boundaries and say, no, this is my personal cell phone. You
Mm.
all took access from me. You took my government phone, you took my laptop, you took my key card. You're not also now going to take my personal phone. I'm
Mhm.
putting up that boundary.
Mhm.
Also, judges, attorneys, everyone gets annoyed with text messages.
Okay.
They are just difficult to deal with as exhibits. They don't always clearly show when the screenshot is taken, they don't always clearly show the date of the message.
Mm.
Like, we'll get screenshots of messages and it just says today at the top with a time. Well, I don't know 6 months from now what day is today, right?
Right, right.
And then maybe the messages have been lost, so that's all I have.
Uh,
With email, you've got a clean chain of communication that can easily be printed off or printed to PDF. It
mhm.
clearly shows who is communicating, clearly
Mhm.
shows when they were communicating, what they're communicating, and everything you really need for a good exhibit. So it's just
Mhm.
better evidence.
Mm. And Whitney, can you share why managers would do that? Because that sounds kind of shady to me. If you know I've been on leave and you contact me on my personal cell phone asking about my performance, I've been go. That seems shady to me. I don't know why do they do that? Why would they do that? I know the timing is supposed to be happening, but why would they do that?
I think a lot of it is people are just scrambling and trying to figure out what they're supposed to do.
Mm.
And so they're a huge part of their performance evaluations because they're still working
Uh,
is
so
getting
they're being evaluated based upon these evaluations.
right and getting
Ah,
them done on time and following the rules and all of that. So you
okay.
can't, as a manager, have all these people that you didn't evaluate. Because then that could also cause a myriad out of issues, right? And so I think there's that where managers are saying, look, I need to get this done because it's part of my
Mm,
job evaluation and I want to get a good evaluation. And so they're pressing the employee to provide some information just so they can get it done and check a box, right? And say, I
wow.
got the evaluations done on time, regardless of the fact that the employee's been prevented from doing their job.
Wow, that is really crazy. Okay. So I was looking on social media and this woman came on and she was talking about her position was cut and they told her that she would need to find another position by August or she would be laid off. So is it, I mean, what's the likelihood that people are able to find new positions if they are told something like that? Is that like just a way to kind of push people out? Or I don't know. I mean, given what's going on right now in the climate, is it feasible that people are going to get other jobs in the federal government if one position has been phased out?
Yeah, so I mean that is the complication of the rifts and the manner in which they're being done. If you cut a program, you don't have to do a reduction in force. You can just reassign someone to a different role.
Mm,
But this has all been complicated by the hiring freeze, the
mm,
mandate that the cuts be done vis-a-vis a RIF, as opposed to reassigning people to maybe a part of government or part of an agency where there's more help needed, right?
mm.
And so you're seeing this whole thing where now the employee is supposed to find a job
Right.
when really that's on the onus of the agency to contact them if
Mhm.
there's a position available for which they're qualified for. And again, because this is being done in such a hasty, haphazard way, we have clients who are getting contacted and being asked, "What's your job experience?" Okay, well, I was working there. You have my resume, so you know what my experience is and what.
Mhm.
And so it is just incredibly sloppy, and I
Yeah.
think people are going to have a really hard time finding a position on their own to go up and say, "Hey, can I have this job?" Um,
Yeah.
Another thing I'm seeing, at least with the DEIA employees, because there's just a lot of really unfortunate and scary things happening with that. So, a DEIA watch list has been put out. With
What?
It's called a DEIA watch list.
What's that?
Some organization has put out a watch list with employees' pictures and all of their information, and they're tracking what is happening to these employees.
What?
And yeah, it's very scary. It's almost like doxing.
Wait,
Uh,
wait. This has been going so in the federal government, there's this list going?
no, so this is a private organization that has created a DEIA watch list. So, for example,
Wow.
if I was a DEIA employee, they would have my picture on the website, my job title, my salary, where
Oh
I
my
worked,
gosh.
all this information about me. It's essentially like outing someone for being a
Like
DEIA.
blacklisting.
Yeah, and it could subject people to threats and all kinds of awful things, uh,
Mm.
as well as them having trouble getting another job. Uh,
Oh.
but I think that there is some political pressure also for there to be evidence that this person was in fact fired as opposed to just transferred to another job. And you see that too in the executive order, as well as some of the other actions that this administration took, where they created like an email address for employees to report on other employees who may be doing DEI work under a different job title or something like that. So I think if you were designated as DEIA, um, they are not going to hire you back because of that political pressure that
Oh
there
my
people
gosh.
want evidence that you were actually fired and not just moved around.
Wow. Is there any legal recourse for people being on this blacklist? Is there a way for them to get off the list or is
Yeah,
there
yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I'm just wondering. That just seems horrific.
Yeah, I wonder to what extent that, that's harassment, as well as defamation, because
Mhm.
allegation is that you were engaged, not just you were doing DEIA work, but you were engaged in illegal behavior
Mhm.
in your
Mhm.
federal job,
Mhm.
vis-a-vis giving people an unlawful preferential treatment based on race, because that's how they have characterized the DEIA work or
Mm,
DEI work, that people were doing something that was illegal, which is much different than like, I just don't agree with DEI work,
right.
that's taking it a step further. But we are representing lots of employees who have been impacted by those executive orders, um, because it is race discrimination.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. Can we talk a little bit more about the discrepancy of how many Black people, particularly Black women, are impacted by all this, and what ways do you feel like racism is playing a role here? Racism and sexism.
Yeah, so I suspect, I don't really believe in coincidences, but I suspect that an analysis was done and that, by Project 2025 and others.
Hmm.
And I remember not too long ago, there was this big article that came out and said PG County is one of the wealthiest Black, counties
Hmm.
in the country. People see stuff like that and they get upset.
Hmm.
And our article was highlighting how jobs in the federal government were helping to create this wealth. And so I
Hmm.
think targeting jobs like DEI, that you're going to get caught in the dragnet, a lot of people of color and a lot of women, because that's
Hmm.
predominantly who was holding those jobs.
Right, right. Okay. And then you talked about the deferred resignation offer. Let's talk about that because I've heard people talk about that. They've said they've gotten an offer and they had like a really quick turnaround time that they had to respond. So, can you talk about a little bit more about the deferred resignation offer? What is it? And what do you advise people who get this? What do you advise that they do?
Yeah, I think it just depends on your personal circumstances. I think for some people, it could work. If you're planning to retire, and taking the deferred resignation will get you through whatever time period you need to get through to be eligible for retirement, and you can spend that time on admin leave completing the paperwork. And I have a client who took the agreement, and she's been gardening, and she's retiring, so it works for her.
Mhm.
But I think for most people, they are taking it literally out of just fear that they're gonna get riffed anyways.
Mm,
So, and the quick turnaround is because they don't want you to really read the language, because it's
mhm,
very, very, like, uh, uh, friendly to the government. It's like you can't bring any challenges related to the program, and all kinds of, release language and all this stuff. And also what we're seeing is people are taking the deferred resignation program. And let's say that the sort of consideration, what you get in exchange is that you get to be on admin leave for all this period of time.
mhm,
Well, some people are signing the agreements and not getting put on admin leave until a month or so later. So they're not even getting the full benefit
mm,
of the agreement.
mhm,
We are also exploring whether or not there's something called a statute called the Older Workers Benefit Protection Act, which gives individuals who are over the age of 40 the right to review these types of agreements for 21 days. So if you're being told, hey, you got 3 days to review and sign this, that runs afoul of the Older Workers Benefit Protection Act. And so agencies, we've noticed, are really struggling with complying with that. And that would be
mhm.
something that would go to the EEOC. So
Okay.
we're exploring those class actions because that's just straight up age discrimination.
Hmm.
That we're not going to give you the benefit of the agreement if you take advantage of the full 21 days to review this.
Mm.
So that's a problem.
Okay. So if a Black woman receives this deferred resignation offer, but she wants more time to review it, let's say she's given like 48 hours, that you need 72 hours, you have to let us know. How can she word it in a way so she gets more time to actually and effectively review it, even with an attorney?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that, again, I would be creating a paper trail, and I would say, look, under the Older Workers Benefit Protection Act, and then I would cite whatever paragraph is in the agreement and say, I have 21 days to review this. And if you're not going to allow me to go on admin leave now, I think that that's discriminatory because I'm exercising my rights under this provision and essentially being penalized for that. So, I would say that and see if that makes them say, okay, well, you can go ahead and go on admin leave now, while you're deciding to sign the agreement or not. They may say no. And, I think that's when you're in the realm of filing a EEO complaint.
Wow.
But yeah, the effect is that people who, take advantage of that are getting less time on admin leave.
Okay. So with the deferred resignation, that means they're on administrative leave. And then what happens after that?
Then they voluntarily separate.
They voluntarily separate. So then that means that they go into retirement?
Most people are just leaving federal employment because they're scared right now. And they're not retirement age and don't have enough years in service to retire.
Okay.
So
I think this is the part I'm unclear about, right? So if they get the deferred resignation offer, what are the benefits of doing that? Because either way, you're going to get laid off. RIF, you're going to get laid off. Deferred resignation, you're laid off. So what are the benefits of doing the deferred resignation?
I completely agree with that. And I think that's one of the things that we're going to be litigating is that it is sort of a hollow offer. You don't really get anything.
Yeah.
You basically get the same thing you would get if you just kept working, right? I mean, it's May now. So if you haven't been, well, here's the thing too, is a lot of people took the deferred resignation because they did get a RIF notice and now it's been stayed by the courts. And had they not taken it, they would still have their job, right? So it is, I don't really know what the benefit is. They were trying to say, oh, well, it's a benefit because you get this vacation. Again, we're seeing people who are taking the deferred resignation and then they're not even getting to go on admin leave. They're being told, no, we still need you to work. So they're not even getting the admin leave a lot of times. And I think that falls in the realm of potentially EEO complaints, or maybe it's a situation where people want to think about rescinding their acceptance, which I think
you can rescind it?
Right, yeah. So
is it like a window of time that you're able to rescind it?
I think it depends on the agency. So each agency has their own terms, and those terms are have been fluid over time. Okay. So I would be reviewing the agreement and getting some confirmations on, can I rescind this and things like that.
Okay. So if they rescind it, then what happens then?
Well, I think you're gambling with, okay, you may end up being riffed, or maybe nothing happens at all. It's that sort of chaotic right now.
Oh my God. Okay. And can you distinguish for people if they get the RIF or this deferred resignation offer and they want to seek legal counsel? We've talked about this previously, but can you just distinguish again why it's important to go to a labor and employment attorney and not like a general attorney who covers everything?
Yeah, I mean, just because it's a specialized area of law, it's almost like going to a doctor, and I don't want to oversell it, but you wouldn't go to a podiatrist if you had heart trouble. They're both doctors, but a podiatrist is just not going to have the specialized skill to help you with heart problems. The same thing, that would be like asking me about, there are areas of law. I don't do patent law, IP law. I don't do it. I don't know anything about it. I'm an attorney, but I don't know anything about it. And I think that people are under the impression that, oh, race discrimination claims and that kind of stuff is like, anybody can do that. But it is a specialized area of law, particularly in the federal sector, because the federal government, any federal employee is going to know, they've got their own rules. They've got their own processes. It can get complicated. Because there's interplay between the various different statutes and the regulations. And it's very easy for an inexperienced attorney, like I was at one point, to get turned around, to miss things, to
Mhm.
not understand, certain aspects of
Mhm.
that are unique to federal employment.
Okay.
Um, those kind of mistakes can mean that you don't get to bring your claim or you lose.
Oh, okay. So it could be really bad outcomes. So what I hear you saying, Whitney, is the importance of getting a labor and employment attorney and asking them if they're familiar with litigating against the federal government.
Yes, you want to make sure that someone knows about the Merit Systems Protection Board and their procedures,
Okay.
the EEOC, the Office of Special Counsel. If they have any experience doing labor law in the federal sector, because that's different than in the private sector. A
Mm,
lot of things with NLRB, which I'm sure everyone's heard of, don't apply in the federal sector, or there's things in the federal sector that don't apply in the private sector. So, I mean, you really want someone who has, experience doing federal employment law work.
okay. And what are your recommendations about how to find this type of attorney?
I think probably one of the easiest ways to do that would be to Google things like MSPB attorney. Um,
MSTB?
yeah, because if you Google EEOC attorney, you're going to get people who predominantly do the private sector, which is just a different process altogether.
Hmm.
And so I would Google like MSPB attorney, federal employment law attorney, things like that. Uh,
Okay.
and then carefully review their website,
Okay.
have an understanding of what their background and experience actually is, which should be in their biography. Because
Okay.
sometimes when you look closely, it's like most of their work is private sector. So
Hmm.
they don't necessarily really have that specialized
Okay.
experience. We get a lot of questions about, well, how many RIF appeals have you done? And my partner and I always say none. Because, like I said, the last time there were a significant number of RIFs being done, I was 7. So, I haven't done any. These are unprecedented times, but I at least have the foundational knowledge of how to navigate, these various different administrative agencies, which is
Mhm.
um, very important, because what we're also seeing is even these administrative judges need to be educated on what arguments can and can't be raised
Mm.
for these RIF appeals. It's
Wow.
just so unprecedented.
So new territory, new territory. But you need to have someone, an attorney who's familiar with federal law.
Absolutely. And I would also be asking someone, how do you keep up with federal employment law cases? Andrew and I have a program, a database called CyberFeds that we pay for. Most attorneys use LexisNexis or Westlaw. We have CyberFeds, which is only for federal employment law, that gives us newsletters, um, quick start guides, which go over, it gives you a page or two to go over, for example, RIFs, distills all that down for you. But it's also like you get a lot of access to the federal administrative decisions, which are
Mhm.
not public like in federal court. You can't
Mhm.
just like go on EEOC's website and pull up, someone's case. You can in some cases, but you can't do a deep dive search for case law in the federal employment sector, which is different than case law from the federal courts, again, which is public. Same
Mhm.
thing with MSPB decisions. Yeah, you can get it on their website,
Mhm.
but I would be asking someone, like, how do you do your research when you need to write a brief or something? And that's going to also inform you of how much it might cost. Because if I'm paying somebody by the hour, and they're telling me, well, they've got to go down to the library to search for this stuff, and they don't have a system, an electronic system that they use, where you're gonna
Mm.
be paying for all that time for them to go
That's
to
a long time.
but they gotta make copies, things like that. And it's not to be mean to ask something
Mhm.
like that, but I will be inquiring about, how do you litigate these cases? Because it can be
Mhm.
very easy for an attorney to rack up a $70 or $80,000 bill.
Woo! Woo, that was my next question. So, are most labor and employment attorneys out of pocket or are they contingency only?
It varies. It varies. I think what we're seeing right now, the trend um, with some firms is they are asking federal employees to pay something upfront.
Mm,
And, I think you've got to try to weigh whether or not that makes sense for you and your family,
mm,
given the uncertainty of federal employment right now. Because, like I
right.
said, if you hire an attorney who's going to help you hourly, if I do an MSPB, Andrew and I do an MSPB case,
Hmm.
and we take it all the way to hearing, um, that could be easily 90 hours of work times, $400 an hour or whatever. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So make an informed decision,
Yes.
right? Okay. So I think what I'm stuck at is, well, first of all, I'm curious about something, Whitney. So I've heard you say several times about your clients, right? And I've also heard you say that usually the union is kind of following these suits. So when does someone file an individual suit outside of the union? What are those circumstances?
It depends on what the claims are, but typically a federal employee is going to be foreclosed from just going into federal court and filing a lawsuit for a personnel related matter. Generally the courts are going to say, look, there's MSPB, there's FLRA, there's OSC, all of these sort of alphabet agencies where you need to go and exhaust your administrative remedies there first before you come see us here in federal court.
Oh,
Um, and so I think that where we mostly see that people individually going is actually when they're filing appeals, like with the Fed Circuit. Um, but then, I wonder too if like defamation claims are going to come out of this, and someone could individually go file something like that, uh,
hmm.
for sure, because of like I said, the DEI watch list thing.
That
Uh,
is outrageous. I did not hear about that.
Yeah, when you have time, Google DEI watch list. It'll come right up,
Wow.
someone running this organization. But
Oh,
generally, you're sort of stuck with the federal administrative process, and so when you see these headlines that Kathy Harris at MSPB was fired, and then the chair at NLRB terminated. Well, that's kind of cutting these agencies off at the kneecaps. You have
mm.
to have a quorum and stuff for decisions to come out. So it's really tough times right now with
So
the
they're trying to gut the system, basically.
yeah. So you can appeal something and you can complain, but it's almost like who are you gonna call? Ghostbusters, like nobody's
Oh
here.
my gosh.
Um,
And then with the EEOC complaints, they're are they making it more challenging to file these complaints? Are there less EEOC officers to even investigate?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're getting responses now, and they're saying, "Look, we've had a large number of staff attorneys who write decisions and things who are have left. So we're not going to be able to get you your decision for a while."
Mm,
So there's a myriad of issues with that,
mm.
both the internal agency EEO process and just at the EEOC itself. Um,
Okay. And what are some of the common issues that you're hearing from Black women who are either currently employed by the federal government or they've been laid off? What are some of the common issues that they're dealing with in relation to this?
I think one of the main things is a lack of support. I'm seeing where a lot of Black women thought that they had friends in the workplace
Mm,
who are now sort of leaving them hanging because
mhm,
they were able to promote up and out to avoid getting riffed or put on admin leave and various different things like that. Uh,
mm,
so I think a lot of people are getting, and particularly Black women are getting gut checks that, okay, not only was this job not as stable as I understood it to be, and
yeah.
everyone has understood federal employment to be, but these people who I thought we were in solidarity with together are not. everybody's out for themselves right now.
Right, right. So there's like this fear mentality. So you said the managers are looking out for themselves. And
Mhm.
so the people who are, kind of rift, they're kind of like, what's happening? And like not really knowing what's happening, not knowing what recourse. And then if you're still at the federal government and you haven't gotten your rift, tell us a little bit about what that experience is like. What are you hearing from Black women about just the anticipation?
Yeah, beyond the uncertainty of maybe not having a job, but also the chilling effect that all of this is having on the workplace, where people are
Mhm.
afraid to say anything that may be perceived as controversial or as
Mhm.
criticism, or anything like that.
Mm.
So this is going to unfortunately negatively impact the workplace where there's going to be a real stifling of the sharing of ideas,
Yeah,
particularly if those ideas are coming from a person of color and specifically if they're coming from a Black woman. Because
yeah.
all someone has to do is label it as DEI conversation and you could be in trouble.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So before we wind down and talk about your services, Whitney, and how people can contact you, what words of wisdom? Because it sounds like this is so um, anxiety provoking about what's happening, and it's so dismal. Any words of wisdom that you can offer to Black women who either currently working for the federal government or who have been laid off and just that angst? Any words of wisdom you can offer?
Sure. I definitely think that knowing and understanding your rights is really important.
Mhm.
MSPB's website actually has a wealth of information on it.
Can you give me the website? I'll put it on the chat.
Yeah, www.mspb.gov.
spb.gov.
Hmm. And you
Okay.
can just, go around there and see, what's on there, but they have a lot of really good information.
Okay.
Um, OPM's website kind of has a lot of good information. Some things have been scrubbed, uh,
Um,
but that's still a good place to kind of just,
what's their website?
www.opm.gov.
Okay.
And
What
I
information? What information is on both of these websites? Can you just?
Sure. So MSPB is going to talk about their the appeals that you can file with them and what their procedures are and any happenings going on at the agency, changes in regulations, different things like that.
Mhm,
OPM is essentially the sort of human resources office or human resources agency for the entire federal government.
mhm,
I will be looking on their website to see if there are executive orders that are coming out that might be impacting your work
mhm,
and your position. I would also be looking for anything that might indicate that there's other sort of initiatives going on that you need to be aware of. For
mhm.
example, the 5 emails thing, you know,
The
things
what
like
emails?
the five bullet points
Oh,
went out and things like that. I would just be,
yeah.
kind of keeping my finger on the pulse with those 2 agencies,
Mhm,
to see what's out there.
mhm, mhm,
But also, I would be really thinking about making sure I'm gaining skills that will allow me to pivot into the private sector. So,
mm,
one thing that we're hearing is that federal employees, despite their wealth of experience and expertise, are
mhm,
having trouble pivoting to the private sector. So,
mm.
I think it's
Why is that?
so. Let's say that you work for the nuclear Energy Regulatory Commission, and
Mhm,
your job was being someone who, reviewed some kind of, process or something that maybe is not necessarily translatable to the states, right?
um,
Because their states are probably not really dealing a lot with nuclear energy and things like
mhm,
that.
mhm,
Um, Positions where the federal government sort of has the controls most of the efforts in a certain area. Uh,
mhm,
it's hard to then go into like state government or local government because they're just not really doing that work.
Mm,
But just because they're not doing a specific thing that you were doing for the federal government, I think it's important to look at what you're doing and say, look, what skills do I have because of the work that I do? And I think
mm,
a lot of people who are on admin leave,
mm,
now almost 6 months, 4 to 6 months, they're not only losing skills, you may have forgotten uh,
wow.
many things that you were doing. So I would be, if you're on admin leave, I would definitely be, taking notes on, what skills you gain from the federal government, particularly skills that make you unique. One of
Mm,
the main things that federal employees are going to have a lot of experience doing is
mm,
applying their work in such a way that it needs to be consistent with laws, rules, regulations, and policies. So I would be using those unique skills and translating. And there's some other efforts too, like up here in the DC area, Maryland, they're training people to be teachers. So I wouldn't be afraid of maybe a career change altogether
mm.
and different things like that. But I would be thinking about, what my next move would be.
Okay, so not just waiting, like, oh my God, what's going to happen, but trying to kind of redirect that anxiety to what your options might be.
Absolutely. And I think, also one thing I would do though is if you do decide to take other employment in the private sector,
Mhm.
is just get some kind of confirmation that, there's not a conflict with you taking that job in the private sector, right? So for example, if you worked for the EPA
Mhm.
and there was a company that you were involved in enforcement actions against,
Mhm.
you did inspections or whatever and gave them a bad grade or something.
Mhm.
It may be a conflict for you to then go turn around and work for that company.
Mm.
So I would just be careful with any kinds of conflicts of interest and things like that.
Okay. Okay. And if you're on administrative leave, are you able to look for other jobs, or can that be used against you some kind of way that you were looking for another job? And if you find another job, can that be used against you in some kind of way? I don't know.
Yeah, so the guidance, the last that I saw on OPM's website was that you could look for a job.
Hmm.
Again, with the caveat that if you're going to take other employment, you need to make sure that there's not some kind of conflict.
Okay.
Because even like criminal statutes, federal criminal statutes, and or at least it has a criminal provision. Uh,
Hmm.
if there's a conflict of interest and you do something that creates that, so technically it's like a crime, or you could be imposed civil penalties.
Mm.
So I wouldn't want to get into that.
Hmm.
My understanding is yes, you can look for a job, and I would be looking for a job because it's taking people a long time. There's also job fairs and things going on, so I'll be looking into those and tapping my network and stuff like that.
Okay.
Particularly if you know someone who works in HR in the private sector who can give you some advice on what skills to play up. Um,
Okay.
and I think too in the private sector they're using a lot of AI to review resumes.
Mm.
So a federal employee resume on USA Jobs is usually like 10 pages long, because they want to know everything you've done.
Mm.
Private sector, they don't want that. So
Mm.
if the last time you applied for a job was 15 years ago, because you've been in federal, a lot of things have changed. So
Yeah.
I would be using this time period to learn as much as possible.
Okay. So kind of get prepared as you're waiting as well.
Yes.
Okay. And let's say you do find another job, then you need to let the federal government know that you've gotten this other job and ask if there's a conflict of interest.
So I don't know that I would tell them, like a manager, where I was going. Um, I think you can just say, look, I'm resigning effective of this date as opposed to the end of the resignation period. Uh,
Okay.
each agency is supposed to have a designated agency ethics official that's called DEO,
Hmm.
DAEO.
Hmm.
And if you need an opinion about whether or not something is a conflict, you can reach out to the DAO and get a written opinion.
Oh.
And that's sort of supposed to be your safe harbor. If later it comes out that, hey, your new job violates the conflict of interest statutes or policies, you can say, well, I have this safe harbor letter and I asked.
Mm-hmm.
Do I think that everyone needs to do that? You know, if you worked in HR and you go and work for HR, at Google or, Meta or whatever, no, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm talking about situations where it's like, I worked at the SEC and, I was involved in regulating this particular entity, and now I'm going to work at that entity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we'll say most people who know that jobs in the private sector could pose a conflict, like attorneys. I couldn't go as a federal government attorney and then turn around and, we've seen this where government attorneys have filed class actions against a company, and then, went and represented the people filing the class action and things, just different things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But most people know if a private sector job is going to potentially cause a conflict because they should have had training on that.
Okay. Okay. So, Whitney, as we're winding down, can you please share about services that you and Andrew offer and how you can be contacted?
Sure, absolutely. So our website is legaljusticeatwork.com. My email is wrailey, Railey, at legaljusticeatwork.com.
Wait, tell me your email again. It's already in the description section of the video, but I want to put it on the screen too. What is it again?
Sure, it's wrailey
Mm-hmm.
at legaljusticeatwork.com.
And what types of lawsuits do you guys focus on? And tell us about the consultation. What does the consultation process look like?
Sure. So on our website, you can go on at any time and use our Calendly and book a consultation. And we don't do a typical consultation. It's more of a legal strategy session. So, and if it's 1 hour in advance of your meeting, we would ask for any documents you want us to review. And then during your 1 hour legal strategy session, we will talk about the documents you provided, answer any questions you have, and talk about solutions or strategy moving forward. We predominantly, like I said, represent federal employees. We have clients all the way out in California, and here in DC, and everywhere in between. And so we do, representing individuals before the administrative agencies I discussed. But we also do some things that I don't know that other law firms do. And that's what I'm going to call adverse action defense. So, for example, if someone's being terminated, they're going to get a proposal letter that says, hey, I want to fire you. And here's why. And you have 15 days to respond. Not a lot of time. We had a client come to us not too long ago, a few months ago, and she, after 10 years, got a proposal to remove her from federal service. And we were able to save her job by filing a written reply. We did an oral reply, and the proposed action against her was rescinded. So if you get something like that, it's under a very tight timeline. Definitely something that you want to talk to an attorney about. How do I respond to this? Because they're often riddled with mistakes, and there's often a lot of defenses that can be raised. So that's one thing that we do that I haven't seen a lot of law firms doing, the adverse action defense.
That's fascinating. I had no idea that you guys covered the whole country. I thought it was like psychologists I can only work with as a therapist, only people in California. But you can work with people across the United States.
Yeah, so for federal employees.
Okay.
With respect to private sector clients, Andrew and I are both licensed in Kentucky. But we also we are also admitted in federal court in Kentucky and Indiana, as well as we partner. Let's say we have a client who we want to represent in Idaho. We often can find an attorney out there that will, it's called Pro Hoc Vice, as in the federal court there. So there's, we can expand our representation, but generally that's what the areas that we sort of practice in would be, federal employees all over the country, and then private, mostly in Kentucky and Indiana.
Okay, I see a question came in. They're asking about Canada.
Oh, so that's an interesting question. I think that if it were a federal employee who was in Canada as a duty station for some particular reason, then yeah, I suppose we could do that, because they have a job that's tied to the federal government and subject to U.S. law, but they just happen to be stationed in Canada. That could be something. But if they're just a citizen in Canada with an issue, private sector issue in Canada, I wish we could, but that's not something we could do.
So what would you advise? Well, if you fit the criteria of what Whitney just said, and that you are a federal employee and you're working in Canada, is that correct? Then contact Whitney and consult with her. But what about if they are a private citizen in Canada and it's a private industry? What would you advise or suggest that she do in terms of legal recourse or finding an attorney?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know what? My advice remains the same with respect to finding an attorney. You want to use those keyword searches, for what you are looking for. So, for example, if I'm in Canada, I'm looking for an attorney who handles race discrimination claims. I'm going to put in, race discrimination attorney in, whatever city. And then I'm going to look closely at their website and make sure that labor and employment law is what they do. It's not, some attorneys have websites that have, 30 things they do. That's a jack of all trade, master of none. And so I would stay away from things like that. And I would be asking, again, the same questions about, what's your experience? How do you handle litigating these claims? What is sort of your litigation style and strategy? So those are things that I would be asking. I think it's hard getting word of mouth referrals, just because people's situations are just factually different. And so someone may have a great case, or they may have a not so great case, and their view of an attorney's helpfulness can be skewed by that. So I think that can be kind of hard. But if someone is telling you to stay away from an attorney, I would definitely consider that.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So everyone, please check out. Whitney has given us a wealth of information. She's also provided a lot of resources. She's provided information about how to contact her as well. So if you're a Black woman who currently works for the federal government, or you've been laid off, hopefully you got a lot out of this video, and maybe go back and look at it again and again and again, and maybe take notes and follow up. If you're a Black woman maybe who does not work for the federal government, then I'm asking you to please share this with another Black woman who does. Because so many Black women, as Whitney said, the federal government hires a lot of Black people, particularly Black women. So more than likely you do know of a Black woman who's been impacted or will be impacted by this. So please share this video with her as well. I can imagine there's a lot of stress, a lot of fear going on right now. And we want to offer support to our sisters about what's going on. It's a lot of craziness going on right now in the world. And so remember, there's resources available, and any videos that I share with you, I share about resources. That my guests offer resources. I have resources in my description section. I don't want you to watch this video or any of my videos and feel like you're alone. There are resources that are available to support you. I want to again say thank you to my Spelman sister, Whitney, for being my guest again. Whitney, any last words before we end today?
I would just say that there's strength in numbers, and I have been completely impressed and inspired by the grit that I've seen from these federal employees who are facing, just the unimaginable, not knowing if you're going to have money to feed your kids and pay for childcare. I mean, summer's coming up. Are you going to be able to afford summer camp? Or are you going to pay for summer camp and be on the hook for it and not even have a job this summer? So just I've been impressed, and I hope that people just continue to fight back because it's just so important to say, hey, this is not acceptable.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, Whitney. And I just want everyone to hear also that we are here to support you in wherever ways we can, that we know that as a people that we keep going through these situations and we continue to pivot. It's important for us also to be aware of and ways that we stay informed about what to do. So there's a lot of craziness going on. Sometimes we might feel overwhelmed about, oh my God, what's next? What's next? What's next? And we do need to stay informed, but we also need to stay well. So I've mentioned before that our wellness is our resistance. So let us stay informed, but let us also stay well. No matter what's going on in the world, we have to focus on what we can control. Because if we get wrapped up in all this stuff, it's crazy making for us. So as a licensed mental health professional, I'm saying to you, as I'm saying to myself, that I have to make sure that we're grounded in what's important, stay informed, but we also need to stay well. So everyone, thank you so much for watching today. Please give this video a thumbs up. Also, as I shared before, please share this video with another Black woman, because if you know another Black woman, more than likely she's impacted in some kind of way with the federal job. Whitney mentioned this earlier, the Black Enterprise Report noting that Black women lost more jobs than any other group in April. So we have to be mindful that there's a lot of stuff going on right now, not to get stuck in the fear, but for us to stay informed and get the resources and plan to pivot. Okay. So everyone, again, thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to my channel. It is absolutely free. And I will see you later. Okay. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.